This is the fourth video in a series of videos I have been making before the release of chapters 3 and 4 of Deltarune, where I try to argue in favor of Kris being the knight. Each video covers a different topic, and can be viewed in any order. This video will be covering an interview that Toby Fox did. Now before we go any further, I must give a spoiler warning. This video will be spoiling Live Alive. If you already believe Kris is the knight and you don't want Live Alive spoiled for you, then you don't need to watch this video. And if you don't believe Kris is the knight and you don't want Live Alive spoiled for you, well, then I guess you should just take my word on it. But if you already played the game or just don't care, then keep watching. But I do recommend you play the game. It's a classic JRPG and one of Toby's favorites. It's extremely unique and not that long for an RPG. It's only 25-ish hours. And you can buy the remake for it on Steam or console. But with that being said, let us continue. So first we will cover the interview. There's a link to the interview in the description if you just want to read it yourself. And then after we go over it, I will give additional context for it, and we'll give a final spoiler warning before doing so. So in May of 2023, Square Enix released an interview between Yoko Shinomura and Toby Fox. They basically interviewed each other. And the topic of the interview was Live Alive and how it inspired Toby's work. When most people talk about this interview, they just skip to the bottom where Toby talks about Megalovania. But there's a super important part in the middle that we are going to be talking about today, where Toby is asked his favorite part of Live Alive, and this is what he has to say. As far as individual chapters go, I really loved the Middle Ages chapter. After all the scenarios with atypical game protagonists, finally revealing a standard fantasy setting, with a knight hero as one of the final chapters, was such an excellent twist for a JRPG, and a perfect lead up to the actual last chapter itself. To think a heroic knight of justice would end up like that. It's the kind of wonderful betrayal of expectations that influenced me when I created Undertale as well. You know, the thought process of, to think the protagonist could actually... Anyway, I don't think I'm supposed to say any more about that. To be honest, if anything, this Live Alive influence is even stronger in my current work, Deltarune. Not only is the story separated into different chapters, but the player's character is also a sword-wielding fantasy knight who may play another role than just a simple hero. Now, Toby is trying to keep things vague here for people reading this who might not have played Live Alive or Deltarune. But I feel like even not knowing the context, it's pretty clear what Toby is getting at, even if you've only played Deltarune. But if you do know what happens in Live Alive, then it becomes very clear what Toby is saying here, and I will be giving you the extra context for Live Alive in just a moment. But before I do, that last line, the player's character is also a sword-wielding fantasy knight who may play another role than just a simple hero, this is just Toby outright saying that Kris will play an antagonistic role in the story in some way. That alone is basically saying that Kris is the knight. I mean, what? Is Kris going to be an antagonist in the story but isn't the knight? Then what are they even doing? But now, let's talk about Live Alive. This is the final spoiler warning. So Live Alive uses a chapter structure. Each chapter is self-contained and is based around a different time period. After you beat all the chapters, you unlock a new chapter set in the Middle Ages. The protagonist of the Middle Ages chapter is a knight named Orsted. The chapter starts with Orsted winning the princess's hand in marriage, only to have her kidnapped by the Lord of Dark 5 minutes later. Orsted, of course, immediately sets out to defeat the Lord of Dark and rescue the princess. We recruit some allies and then head out to defeat the Lord of Dark. After beating him, we discover that he was a fake. We escape, but 2 of our companions die. We return to the king empty-handed, but then we are tricked into killing the king. We escape the castle, and upon returning to the Lord of Dark's throne, we find that your wizard companion had faked his own death. He reveals that he was the one that tricked you into killing the king, in order to take his revenge on you for beating him in the contest and marrying the princess because he wanted to marry the princess. And so you kill him. And then the princess shows up and says that she loved him more than you. And then Orsted, who up until this point had been a silent protagonist, says this.
Naught remains. Alone. Utterly alone. Cast out. Unloved. Outside the grace of gods. The Archon's roost. They call this shrine of death. Yet nowhere do I spy our Lord of Dark. His throne sits empty, wanting for an heir. Did I not do all that was asked? Did I not serve and seek my fair and just reward? And for my deeds, they damn me. Name me demon. And who am I to deny it? Demon, then, renouncing former ties and titles. And in their place, I claim... the Lord of Dark, Odio!
After this point, Orsted is the main antagonist and villain of the game. The final chapter sees the other protagonists sent to the Middle Ages to band together to stop Orsted. And he is the character that Toby says was the inspiration for Kris. I'm not sure what else there is to really say about this. I think it mostly speaks for itself. But to restate, the character that was the inspiration for Kris's character and story is a character that is a playable protagonist, who is a knight, who is also the main antagonist of the game. It could not be more on the nose. This isn't just Toby confirming that Kris is the knight. This is him telling us where he got the idea to even have this plotline at all. To have the main player character also serve as the main antagonist of the story. Now, of course, Kris's story is not going to be just like Orsted's. It's already very different. Orsted was a pretty standard fallen hero, whereas Kris is acting as the knight from the start of the game, for one thing. But learning about what inspired the story, we can make some theories about this. For one thing, this explains why the knight is a knight at all, because the knight is the standard JRPG protagonist role. And since we are having the protagonist also be the antagonist, they must both be a knight. That's a point I've never actually talked about before. That Kris is literally a knight. I've seen people downplay this and stuff, but it is really important. If Kris wasn't a knight, I don't think anyone would really think Kris is the knight, even if they did make a fountain. Reasonably being a knight in the Dark World is pretty important for being considered to be the knight. I would count this as a point against, say, Mayor Knight, because it wouldn't make sense for her to be a knight in the Dark World. If she went into the Dark World, she would clearly be a queen, as queen is clearly meant to be a stand-in for Noelle's mom. So I don't think it would make sense that she would be a knight, and this thought can be taken even further. What do knights do in stories? They save princesses, usually from dragons and other nasty stuff. So, who's the princess? Well, if Noelle's mom is a queen, then that means that Noelle is the princess. Look, she even has a crown on her bumper cart. So far, there are only 3 characters that are knights in the Dark World, that being Kris, Susie, and Berdly. And this trope of knights saving princesses has already been brought up in Chapter 2 when Berdly says that Noelle is his damsel in distress. Also, about Susie being a knight, she is also a dragon and a princess? She has all these crowns in her Castletown room. I guess the idea is that since Noelle is a princess, Susie is one too from like marriage and stuff, because that's how that works. Unless there's like something else going on. But back to the point, if Susie is a knight and Noelle is Susie's princess that she needs to save, then who is Kris's princess? Well, of course, it would be Des. If Noelle is a princess, then Des would also be one. So Kris, as the knight, is trying to save Des, or at least something like that. That might not be their full motivation. I think there's more going on than just that, but I do think it's on the list of goals that Kris has. And there is actually some evidence in the game for this. When talking to Spamton, one of his dialogue options is fear, in which he says, "What are you afraid of? According to Encyclopedia of Being Afraid, there's nothing to fear except..." Can anyone hear me? Help. What? No, I didn't hear anything just now. But it sounded like they were talking to you. So when Spamton's eyes get all staticky, it seems like he's actually picking up some kind of outside signal. It's not super clear how it's happening, but this dialogue that he's saying does line up with the unused dialogue found in the game's code. Most people agree that this dialogue is from Des, wherever she is trapped. Whether or not this is from the past or present is debatable. I think it's from the past when she first got lost, but with the Spamton dialogue and what he says after, but it sounded like they were talking to you. To me, this is clear what the meaning is in this. This is Des calling out for Kris's help. Granted, this evidence is a little shaky, but I don't really see what else this could mean. Honestly, I think Kris and Des's relationship will be very important to the story. I think they were fairly close. I think Kris was better friends with Des than they ever were with Noelle. We've been told so little about Des to the point where the only really concrete thing we know about her is that she played guitar. And one of the main things we were told about Kris is that they play piano. And honestly, I would be surprised if they didn't play music together. Like looking back at the Spamton sweepstakes, specifically the one Noelle post about Kris playing piano at her house and then stopping when Noelle walks into the room, a lot of people are still questioning the meaning of this. And what do I think about it? I think this is about Des. I think Kris used to play music with Des at Noelle's house, and what Kris is doing in this post is them reminiscing about this. I think this will be really important. Now there is more I want to say about Kris being the knight and how Des plays into it, but I don't want to get too far off the original topic of this video, which is to cover the Live Alive interview. Plus these topics, while I think they are made better with the context of Live Alive, don't need it to be explained, so I'm going to split this video in two. So make sure to subscribe for part 2, because it's so good I wanted to make sure that everyone got to see it without having to be spoiled on Live Alive. But a few more things before I go. I want to mention the song 74, which is a song that Toby Fox worked on, which also covers a lot of these same ideas and themes, so I recommend listening to that if you haven't already. Also, I have a Discord server that you can join. There's a link to that in the description. If you join before the new chapters come out, you'll get a unique role in the server, so just so you know. And if you really love my videos, you can support the channel over on Ko-Fi. Links to all of that is in the description. Anyway, see you next time.